They say silence is golden. Up here, or rather down here, in the belly of the Howl's Keep, it's a damn shroud. It presses against you, a physical weight, seeping into your bones colder than the Antarctic wind that howls across the ice cap above. We're so far removed from the world here, buried under miles of ice, that the silence isn't just an absence of sound, it's a presence. 4 months we've been down here, 4 months since we last saw the sun. 8 more to go before the next team relieves us. Time stretches and contracts in this white desert. Days bleed into each other, marked only by the rhythmic thump of the drill as it bores deeper into the ice. They call this progress, this never-ending search for knowledge. Back in 35, the discovery of Vostok under the ice changed everything. Lake Vostok led to the creation of our first underground Antarctic base. Fast forward a few decades and now there are a few dozen bases scattered around the continent, each one filled with scientists like myself. The Howl's Keep is the latest, the most advanced, or so they say. My old man used to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Out here, in the face of this ancient, unforgiving landscape, I finally understand what he meant. We may have our fancy tech, our ice eye and the mole, but out here, we're still just specks of dust, clinging to the edge of existence. My name is Henry Brennan, and I'm an acoustician, or as they call us now, a psychoacoustic specialist. It's a fancy title for someone who studies how sound messes with your head. I used to be a big shot in the field, or at least that's what I told myself. I had a lab at MIT, funding, a team of bright-eyed grad students eager to hang on my every word. I was working on the cutting edge, pushing the boundaries of what we knew about the human brain and its response to sonic stimuli. Then came Project Ascendant. It was meant to be my magnum opus, a study on the effects of prolonged sensory deprivation coupled with targeted sonic stimulation. We were going to unlock the hidden potential of the human mind, or some such nonsense. I was so blinded by ambition, by the lure of discovery, that I didn't see the precipice I was standing on. The incident, it involved a young man, barely out of his teens. David, a volunteer. He was a good kid, bright, enthusiastic, too trusting. He ended up in a psych ward, catatonic. They said it was a pre-existing condition that I couldn't have known. But I did know. Deep down, I knew I pushed him too hard, ignored the warning signs. My colleagues, they turned their backs on me. My funding dried up. My reputation, once sterling, was tarnished, reduced to whispers and pitying glances. That's how I ended up here, at the bottom of the world, chasing ghosts in the ice. I took this job because no one else would have me, because the incident made me want to disappear, and because, truth be told, the research is vital, although my enthusiasm for the expedition is beginning to wane. They say the ice holds secrets, clues to the planet's past, to the origins of life itself. Ironic, isn't it? I came here to escape the consequences of my own scientific overreach, only to find myself surrounded by another, even grander pursuit of knowledge. Now, my research is more important than ever. The world is getting crowded. It's 2045 and resources are scarce. People are getting desperate. A big discovery here could change everything. Not just for the scientific community, but also for the average Joe. It's amazing how the right discovery could change public opinion. Not so long ago, I was the villain. Now, I could be a hero. Our current mission is twofold: to analyze ice cores for data on past climate patterns and to search for extremophiles, microorganisms that can survive in the most extreme conditions. I won't bore you with the technical details, but trust me when I say it's painstaking work. We use a state-of-the-art drilling system, a marvel of modern engineering we affectionately call the mole. It can reach depths previously unattainable, equipped with a suite of sensors, cameras, and sampling tools. We have drills for going down, but the mole can also drill horizontally. And then there's the ice eye, our ground-penetrating radar. It's like a giant X-ray for the ice, allowing us to map the subsurface structure and identify potential points of interest. But the real star of the show, at least for me, is the EMS, the Emotional Monitoring System. It's my baby, a piece of tech I developed before the fall. It's a complex system that can detect and measure emotional states through biofeedback data. Heart rate, brain activity, vocal patterns, you name it. Each of us wears an emoti band, a sleek, unobtrusive device that looks like a smartwatch but is far more sophisticated. It feeds data to the sentience engine, a central computer that analyzes the information and provides real-time emotional readings. The EMS was the reason I was brought on this expedition. The higher-ups believed it would be useful in monitoring the crew's psychological well-being in this isolating environment. Little did they know how crucial it would become. I keep going over the specs in my head, wondering if I should have added a second failsafe, a backup system. But who could have anticipated what we found? The days passed, marked by the whir of the drill and the endless white outside. The crew, a motley bunch of scientists and technicians, began to show the strain of isolation. Tempers frayed, arguments erupted over trivial matters. I found myself retreating further into my work, losing myself in the data, the silence. I missed Leo's, my son's, birthday last week. He wanted me to come home for it. God, I feel like shit for not being there. He's only 8. I hope he understands one day. I try to tell myself that what we're doing is important, that it will make a difference, that he'll be proud of his old man. But some days the silence gets so loud you can't hear yourself think. And some days, especially recently, it wasn't all silent. It was Scott, one of our geologists, who first noticed it. An anomaly deep within the ice detected by the ice eye. An area of unusual density, far too regular to be a natural formation. At first we thought it was just another pocket of brine, or maybe some strange rock formation. But as we got closer, the readings became more unnatural. The whole team was buzzing with excitement. For weeks we had found nothing of interest. The expedition's funds were about to run out. This was it, our last chance to make a meaningful discovery. Even I began to hope that we may have stumbled upon something significant. We began excavating, meticulously using the mole to bore a horizontal tunnel towards the anomaly. Every rotation of the drill, every chunk of ice extracted, was met with bated breath. And then, we broke through. I remember the moment vividly. The mole's camera feed resolved into a clear image, a smooth, dark surface, utterly unlike the surrounding ice. It was ovoid in shape, resembling a giant elongated egg, partially buried in the ice. Its surface was smooth and polished, devoid of any visible markings except for a network of deep red veins that spread across it like the map of an alien circulatory system. It was both beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The initial scans were inconclusive. The material was incredibly dense, absorbing most of the energy from our scans, making it difficult to get a clear reading. It was also incredibly cold, far colder than the surrounding ice. Anything that touched it froze almost instantly. And then there was the hum, a low-frequency vibration that emanated from the object, barely audible but deeply unsettling. Some members of the crew complained of headaches, nausea, and a strange feeling of unease. Ethan, one of our tech guys, seemed particularly affected. He kept saying he could hear whispers in the hum. I dismissed it at first. Ethan was always a bit of a nervous Nelly. I figured it was just the isolation getting to him, that it's all in his head. We were all feeling the pressure, but then others started reporting similar symptoms. Even I began to feel it, a subtle pressure in my temples. Despite the growing unease, or perhaps because of it, I decided to proceed with the acoustic tests. I wanted to know what sounds this thing made, what secrets it held within its core. We set up the harmonic resonator, a device capable of generating a wide range of frequencies. The idea was to stimulate the object with different frequencies and see how it responded. The first few tests yielded nothing. The object remained silent, inert. Then we hit upon a specific frequency, a low resonant tone that seemed to match the object's natural hum. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The red veins on the object's surface began to glow brighter, the hum intensified, and the air in the tunnel grew heavy, charged with energy. A sound, unlike anything I had ever heard, filled the tunnel. It was like the cry of some colossal beast awakening from a long slumber. And with the sound came a wave of emotion, a surge of pure, unadulterated fear that washed over us, through us, amplified by the EMS, no less. The celebration quickly turned into chaos. No one could explain why the device recorded the scream. Ethan, poor bastard, lost it completely. He started screaming, a high-pitched, blood-curdling wail that echoed through the tunnel, through the entire station. He thrashed, he clawed at his eyes, he begged us to make it stop. We had to sedate him, lock him in his quarters for his own safety, for everyone's safety. It was a temporary fix, I know. But we needed time to figure out what was happening. The others were not as severely affected, but the fear was there, a cold, clammy hand gripping their hearts. Even I felt it, a primal terror that seemed to emanate from the object itself, amplified by the station's acoustics, by the goddamn silence. The EMS readings were off the charts, a storm of fear, anxiety, and dread. The vault, for that's what we started calling it, was not just reflecting sound, it was amplifying emotions, particularly negative ones. And Ethan's scream, that terrified, desperate cry, was now trapped within it, echoing, getting stronger, feeding on our fear, feeding on itself. We had opened Pandora's box, and the first thing that crawled out was our own primal fear, magnified, weaponized, turned against us by this ancient alien thing we had unearthed from the ice. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that we were in deep shit. The scream became the soundtrack to our unraveling. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, a malevolent entity that slithered through the station's corridors, seeped into our dreams and poisoned our waking thoughts. Ethan's initial terror had been a spark, and the vault, that damnable echo chamber, had fanned it into a raging inferno. The fear spread like a contagion, infecting each of us in different ways. Scott, usually stoic and unflappable, became jumpy and paranoid, constantly checking over his shoulder, convinced that something was lurking in the shadows. Becker, our resident optimist, withdrew into himself, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a haunted silence. Lewis, the pragmatic engineer, started having violent outbursts, smashing equipment and screaming at phantoms only he could see. I felt it too, the fear, a cold fist tightening around my heart, stealing my breath, turning my insides to ice. But I couldn't afford to succumb. I was the leader, damn it, the one who was supposed to have all the answers. I had to fix this, had to find a way to shut down the vault, to silence the scream before it consumed us all. But first, we need to address Ethan. We locked Ethan in his quarters, but we should have known better. When we found him, it was already too late. He had used a piece of a broken mirror to... Well, it wasn't pretty. The official cause of death was suicide, but I knew the truth. It was the vault, the entity inside it. It drove Ethan to take his own life. I threw myself into my work, poring over the data from the EMS, searching for a pattern, a weakness, anything that could help us understand what we were dealing with. The readings were chaotic, a maelstrom of fear, anxiety, and despair. But amidst the chaos, I began to notice something, a signal buried beneath the noise. It was the vault's energy signature, the hum that emanated from its core. It seemed to be interacting with our brainwaves, amplifying our emotions, creating a feedback loop of terror. The hallucinations started soon after. I started seeing things, hearing things. One night I saw David, the boy from Project Ascendant, standing at the foot of my bed, his skin pale and translucent. He didn't speak, but I could hear his screams echoing in my mind, a chorus of agony that blended with Ethan's, with the vault's infernal hum. I knew then that the entity was feeding on our fears, drawing strength from our terror. The hallucinations weren't random. They were tailored to each of us, designed to exploit our deepest fears, our hidden vulnerabilities. Scott saw monstrous creatures lurking in the shadows, their claws scraping against the walls. Becca was haunted by the ghosts of his dead family members, their accusing eyes burning into his soul. Lewis saw the station collapsing around him, the ice crushing him, the cold embrace of death. I tried to fight it, to use my knowledge of psychoacoustics to create sonic barriers, to disrupt the entity's energy field. I spent hours in the lab, experimenting with different frequencies, different sound patterns, using the harmonic resonator to generate counter-frequencies that I hoped would neutralize the vault's influence. There were moments of success, brief respites when the hallucinations receded, when the fear subsided. But they were always short-lived. The entity was too strong, too insidious. It adapted, found new ways to burrow into our minds. The station had become a haunted house, a labyrinth of terror. The crew had fractured into isolated islands of fear and paranoia. Trust had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and hostility. We were turning on each other, just as the entity wanted. It was a master manipulator, pulling our strings with invisible threads of fear. I realized that escape was our only hope. We had to get out of there, away from the vault, away from the entity's influence. But getting off the ice in the middle of the Antarctic winter was a near impossible task. The nearest base was hundreds of miles away, and the weather conditions were treacherous. We had limited supplies, and our vehicles, the Ice Striders, were not designed for long-distance travel in such extreme conditions. And then there was the entity. It knew we were trying to escape. It wouldn't let us go that easily. It intensified its attacks, its influence growing stronger. The hallucinations became more frequent, more intense. It was as if the entity was trying to tear the station apart, to trap us inside its icy prison. I decided to send a distress signal, a desperate plea for help to anyone who might be listening. It was a long shot. The signal might not even reach anyone. And even if it did, help could take days, weeks to arrive. And there was a very real possibility that the entity would intercept the signal, that it would know we were trying to alert the outside world. But we had to take the risk. I gathered the remaining crew members, the ones who were still relatively sane, and explained my plan. Becca, surprisingly, was the first to volunteer. He had lost his family years ago in a car accident. He blamed himself. Maybe this was his chance to atone, to make amends. He was a skilled radio operator, the best among us. He would send the signal. Scott, despite his paranoia, agreed to help. He was a geologist, familiar with the terrain. He would help us navigate the treacherous landscape. Lewis, his sanity hanging by a thread, refused to cooperate initially. He was convinced that the outside world was just another illusion, a trick of the entity. But after much persuasion and a few strategically placed sedatives, he reluctantly agreed to join us. He was our engineer, our mechanic. We needed him to keep the Ice Striders running. As for me, I had one last task to perform. I had to confront the entity, not to destroy it, but to buy us some time, to distract it long enough for Becca to send the signal and for the rest of us to prepare for our escape. I went back to the vault, armed with the harmonic resonator and a desperate hope that I could somehow contain the entity, or at least weaken it enough to give us a fighting chance. The moment I entered the tunnel, I felt the entity's presence, a suffocating wave of fear that washed over me. A shape began to form in the air above the vault, a swirling vortex of darkness shot through with streaks of crimson. It was the entity taking form, feeding on our fear. It spoke to me then, not with words, but with images, with emotions, with a torrent of fear and despair that threatened to overwhelm my mind. It showed me visions of a dying world, of a future consumed by darkness, of humanity enslaved by fear. It showed me my own deepest fears, my failures, my regrets, the faces of those I had wronged. The entity fed on negative emotions. It was a parasite, a predator, and we were its prey. I raised the harmonic resonator and began to play the counter frequencies, the ones I had calculated to disrupt the entity's energy field. The sound waves clashed with the entity's hum, creating a discordant symphony of noise. The vortex above the vault writhed and twisted, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror slammed into me, knocking me off my feet, sending the resonator skittering across the icy floor. The hallucinations intensified, my sanity slipping away, my grip on reality loosening. But I couldn't give up. I had to keep fighting. Becca was sending the signal. Lewis and Scott were preparing the ice striders. They were counting on me. I had to hold on, had to buy them time. I scrambled to my feet and made a desperate dive for the resonator. I had to reach it, had to keep playing the counter frequencies, had to buy us some more time. The entity was closing in, its form solidifying, its power growing. I could see its eyes now, two burning orbs of crimson light, filled with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was the face of fear itself, and it was coming for me. I managed to grab the resonator just as the entity surged, its shadowy form solidifying into something monstrous. It was like a creature born from a nightmare, all sharp angles and shifting darkness, its crimson eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. I jammed the device against the vault's surface, my fingers fumbling with the controls, and cranked the frequency to maximum. A piercing shriek filled the chamber, a sound so intense it felt like my skull was about to crack. Its form began to dissolve, to break apart into fragments of shadow and light. But it wasn't enough. It was still too strong. It reformed, its eyes burning with a furious intensity, and turned its full attention on me. That's when Becca burst into the chamber. "It's done, Henry. The signal is sent," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. "We need to go." He didn't understand. I couldn't leave, not yet. If the entity followed us, if it reached the surface, it would be unstoppable. I had to contain it, somehow. "Go, Becca!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Get out of here. I'll hold it back." Becca hesitated, torn between his fear and his loyalty. But he knew, as I did, that there was no other way. He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek, and turned to leave. It was then that the entity struck. Instead of a physical attack, a wave of concentrated terror, more intense than anything we had felt before, slammed into Becca. It was as if the entity had focused all its power, all the amplified fear from the vault, into a single invisible blow. Becca gasped, his eyes widening not in pain, but in absolute, soul-crushing horror. He clutched at his chest, not from a wound, but as if his heart was being squeezed by an invisible hand. He crumpled to the ground, his body not convulsing but utterly still, his face frozen in unimaginable terror. He was gone, his life extinguished not by a physical attack, but by the sheer, overwhelming force of the entity's power, his mind and spirit simply unable to withstand the onslaught of pure, unadulterated fear. I scrambled towards him, but it was too late. The life drained from his eyes, leaving behind a vacant stare. The entity had taken another victim, another soul consumed by the darkness. Rage, hot and fierce, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I grabbed the resonator, my hands shaking with fury, and turned to face the entity. I didn't care about the pain, about the hallucinations, about the consequences. All I wanted was to make it suffer, to make it pay for what it had done. I poured all my rage, all my grief, all my guilt into the resonator, channeling it into a sonic assault of unprecedented intensity. The vault vibrated violently, the red veins on its surface glowing with an almost blinding light. The entity roared, its form flickering wildly, its attacks becoming unfocused. I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. The resonator was overheating, its circuits on the verge of collapse, and my body was failing, my strength ebbing away. But I had to hold on, just a little longer, until Lewis and Scott were done. Then, through the haze of pain and exhaustion, I heard the roar of the Ice Strider's engines. With a final, desperate effort, I directed the resonator's beam at the entrance of the tunnel, at the opening that led to the surface. The ice around the opening began to melt, then refreeze, forming a thick, impenetrable barrier. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might buy me some time. As the last of the ice sealed the tunnel, I collapsed, the resonator falling from my numb fingers. The entity shrieked, its form thrashing wildly, its rage echoing in the confined space. But it was trapped for now. I don't know how long I lay there, on the cold, hard floor of the vault, the entity's fury echoing around me. It felt like an eternity, a lifetime spent in the heart of darkness. But then, through the silence, I heard another sound, a rhythmic thumping. It was the sound of rotors, the unmistakable sound of a rescue helicopter. They had received Becca's signal. They had come for us. The rescue team found me unconscious, half frozen, my body ravaged by the entity's attacks. Lewis was gone. He fled the scene. They never found him. Scott's body was discovered near the entrance of the vault's chamber, just beyond one of the main generators. It appears he had been trying to reach the emergency power override, that he maybe tried to shut the power down, perhaps as a last-ditch effort to stop whatever was happening, but had succumbed to the entity's influence, his body finally giving out under the strain of the amplified fear. He was found curled up, almost peacefully, as if he had simply fallen asleep, but the look of terror frozen on his face told a different story. They pulled me from the ice, from the darkness, and brought me back to the world of the living. But the world I returned to was not the same as the one I had left behind. The official report spoke of a tragic accident, a catastrophic equipment failure, a crew driven mad by the isolation and the harsh conditions of the Antarctic winter. My claims of an alien entity, of a vault that amplified fear, were dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind, the hallucinations of a man pushed to the brink of insanity. But I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it in my own soul. The entity is still down there, trapped beneath the ice, waiting for its chance to escape, a silent threat lurking beneath the frozen wasteland. They say I'm a hero, the sole survivor of a tragic expedition. They gave me medals, accolades, a pat on the back, and a one-way ticket to a quiet, secluded life far away from the ice, from the truth. But I can't forget. I can't escape the echoes of the void, the memory of the screams and the faces of the lost. They haunt my dreams, their voices whispering in the darkness, reminding me of the horror that lies beneath the ice. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right, when the silence gets too loud, I can still hear it. The distant hum of the vault. The entity is still there, waiting, listening, feeding on the world's fear. It's only a matter of time before it breaks free again. And next time I won't be there to stop it. Next time, no one will. The world is not ready for the truth. It's better this way. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't believe. But I know. I remember. And I wait, in dread and silence, for the day the screaming starts again. The day the world finally understands what I meant. The day the fear takes over, and all that's left are echoes of the void.